Morning. What an appropriate cover this morning. Let all that you do be done in love. How important is that for all of us? I asked if I could read this paper that I've had for years and years and years. Being a teacher, and we all are teachers, we need to always remember that we need to be like Jesus. And this is, if Jesus were my teacher, he would know me. I'm sure of that. He'd know my name very well and how old I am. And when my birthday is, he'd know what I like and what I disliked. That's a wonderful thing to be known by someone. It is a rare and wonderful thing to really be known. Not only would Jesus know me, but he would notice me. He'd notice my new shirt, my shoes, my missing teeth, my bandaged finger, my trembling chin, and tear streaks on my dirty face. And he would let me know very clearly that he noticed. Not only would he not escape his perception, he'd let me know he noticed. Being a teacher, being a mother, being a person who loves to be with children, it is our job to notice them. It is our job, because if we are following Jesus and trying to be like him, we have to notice and care about those who are around us. He would hear me too, really hear me. He would be more concerned with me than I am, that I mean more than what I say, what I'm thinking than the accuracy of my words. He would understand why I said what I did. It would be a sense to him that I might feel wrong. Always he'd be affirming, and even when mistakes, knowing the way I was thinking, and what I was thinking about. If Jesus were my teacher, he would value me more than accuracy. I would be more important than anything else, more than stories, texts, songs, and offerings, and even more than furniture. And I would know that I was the most valuable part of everything we did. If Jesus were my teacher, he would pay attention to how I feel, and as much as what I think. Clearly and unmistakably, he would let me know that he knew what I was feeling and that he cared. When my friend moved away, he would know why I was sad and how much it hurt me to lose a friend. And I realized the lousy, empty feeling in my stomach was loneliness, and knowing that it felt a little better if someone helped me let the pain go away. For he would reach inside me and carefully draw out my grief. I didn't even know he was there, and it would make me better. And when I came to class one day, bouncing with joy and excitement over the birth of a baby sister, he would be happy for me. He would take time out to share my happiness, and we'd celebrate together. We'd briefly then come back to work. In a few minutes, we'd learn the lesson twice as fast and twice as well. Yes, he'd know me, notice me, hear me, value me, pay attention to me and to what I feel. But also, this is just a little difference. He'd listen to me. When our class rushed in clamoring and shouting, and I stopped to say, "My grandma died last night," he would be nice and kneel by me and show me how much he cared and how hard he knew it would be for me. He knew it was going to be hard for me, and when we would talk about it with the others, everything suddenly was unimportant. He'd be unafraid to talk of death, so willing to speak of it honestly without smoothing it over, making it nice when it really isn't. And wonder of wonders, there would be tears in his eyes. Another thing he would do, I'm sure, is entrust me with his feelings too, sharing from his life, his joys, his excitement, and his gifts to him from us, and from the mutuality that would develop in a relationship. He would never forget, for I was allowed into his life, and I knew him as a person. And we know that it is easy to know Jesus if we just get into our Bible. He's right there with the answers and talking to us. One so like me, yet so different, so like me and still so different, I would aspire to be like him far more than merely came from on high and taught me what was right and true. Oh yes, he would respect me. Already at age 4, 6, 12, 18, he'd respect me. Strange, bizarre things that I was doing and growing, and he'd never say, "You really don't think that way," or "You'll change your mind when you get older." Knowing and saving the satisfying, nourishing power of respect, he would never be worried or threatened by my different thinking. Accepting my unacceptable ideas would win me to himself forever in my heart, and would tell my mind to wander less and follow him. He treated me in a way that honored my relationship with God. I never got the feeling from him that big people are closer to God than kids are. And you know what else? You might think this silly, but if Jesus were my teacher, I'd like him because he would touch me. His hands would hold mine, his arm around me, fingers through my hair. He'd squeeze my arm and pat my cheek from time to time. I'd like him, and I'd like him to be my teacher. Oh yes, he also planned his lesson well, kept order, made sure we learned the facts, and maintained a healthy classroom. He'd be at a time frightened by stern discipline for us, all the things an ordinary teacher does, but I'd never forget him. I'd never stop growing in love for him and what it was that made him so special, and the special things he had been to me. And about all those extraordinary qualities I'd come to see, I could be taught that he be that way too. They are what Christian-like teachers do. I went to a conference, and this man read this to us, and I thought, wow, those are all wonderful things. And then I came home, and I thought, I have to put this in my book for every day, because every day is an important day in the life of a child. And every child needs people who are teaching him and being like Jesus. So I just wanted to share this as teachers especially go into this new semester and things get hectic and hard, and every day isn't so good and somebody doesn't act right. Remember, if you know your students and you love them, they will respond. And I just like to pass that on to you. It was a blessing to me, and I read it. I had to read it often because there were days when I didn't think I wanted to be like Jesus because of things that had happened. And I had to remember that we do need to always be like Jesus in everyday situations. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing that, Carol. It was really nice, wonderful thoughts about, didn't know that was moving up on me. Welcome this morning. I'm glad you're all here. I hope that you have a chance to go out this afternoon to the community worship service time. My friend Andy Schmeck is going to be there. He's from Princeton, and he is a fantastic speaker and a fantastic young man. He's from this area, but I met him while we were at Trinity. We went there at the same time. We overlapped a couple years, and we went to the church that he is a youth pastor at in Libertyville, Cross Life. And he's just wonderful. So if you get a chance to go see him, I would highly encourage you to do that. It would be a good, a good event for you. This morning, I want to ask a question. Start with this: loaf of bread. Loaf of bread. What can you do with this loaf of bread? So I counted up the slices last night. I don't know if this is standard or not because I don't know much about loaves of bread, but there are 20 slices in here, which will get you about 10 sandwiches, right? 10 sandwiches, especially if you use the end pieces, and if you don't like the end pieces, it'll get you 9 sandwiches. But maybe you could give the end pieces to your dog. 9 sandwiches. That would get about halfway through the first row around here. So, you can't do much with a loaf of bread. I could feed, 9 sandwiches worth of sandwich meat to people and sandwiches to people. Maybe just a couple of you would be able to do that. And if I wanted this loaf of bread, if I wanted to serve this loaf of bread to you, we might each get a little less than a piece around here. With the amount of people that we have, we'd probably get, a quarter of a piece, third of a piece. Now, what if I took this loaf of bread today and I took it to the community worship service? How far do you think it would get? Probably not very far. If I started kind of divvying it up and, tried to get everybody a little piece, it would be a tiny morsel that everybody would get. Maybe just a nibble. Kind of disappointing, probably. And then what happens when people start getting hungry later? I mean, if the community service goes till about noon and people starting to get hungry and they want some food and you have one loaf of bread, what do you do? You see, a similar situation happens in our text this morning. Hopefully you catch on to that. John 6 is our text this morning. So we've been looking at Jesus' encounters with various people and various encounters and conversations that he's had, and they've started with 1 or 2 people here or there that he's had conversations with, that he has introduced himself to, and those 1 or 2 people conversations have begun to make an impact. And that impact has meant that Jesus is starting to get a following, and not just a small following. Here this morning we're going to read about 5,000 men who are following. And the Matthew passage that parallels this account is given in all 4 Gospels, tells us that it's not just men, that's how many men there are, but men and women and children. So there's probably in the range of 10 to 15,000 people hanging around with Jesus at this moment. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of people. So today I want to look at this passage and think about a couple of things. First, in this account, the need was great. A crowd comes, and the need was great. Second, the task was impossible. They try to feed 5,000 men plus their families with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. But then finally, the provision was abundant. And we'll see that at the end. It's not just that they were fed, but they were fed and filled. So I turn this morning to our text, John 6, 1 through 15. I'll read verses 1 through 5 now. After these things, Jesus went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, and a large crowd followed him because they saw the signs which he was performing on those who were sick. Then Jesus went up to the mountain, and there he sat down with his disciples. Now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was near. Therefore, Jesus, lifting up his eyes, and seeing that a large crowd was coming to him, said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread so that these may eat?" So Jesus has been in Jerusalem, and he's been gathering up a following, and people have been impressed, and so they start following him around. And the first thing that you want to do when a large crowd starts following you around is to get away, right? I don't want to deal with a large crowd today. So Jesus takes his disciples, and they go to the mountain, and this is supposed to be a quiet getaway, him and the disciples. And so he begins, he sits down, he's going to teach his disciples, the 12 of them, and they're going to have a small intimate gathering. And then their small intimate gathering is joined by 5,000 men and their families. So Jesus lifts his eyes and sees that there are a whole crowd coming at him. A whole crowd coming up to him because they're seeking what he can do. Now, maybe you know this and maybe you don't, but crowds need things, right? Crowds need things. When people go out to the fair today, the crowd there needs things. You need food, you need water, and you need porta potties. I don't know what Jesus did in the days before porta potties. He must have found something, but crowds need things. They're very needy. They want things, and they want things from Jesus as well. So crowds are very needy. So you know what people do nowadays is you have event planners, right? So when you have an event like a marriage, wedding, you have a wedding planner. When you have big parties, you have event planners. You have a person dedicated to this job of logistics, of making sure that everybody who's there has food, has water, has the basic necessities that they need, all of these things. So you get an event planner, and they kind of oil the machine and make sure things go smoothly. So as Jesus is sitting on this mountainside and he looks up and he sees a big crowd, he says, I need an event planner. Looks around, Philip, you look like a great event planner. You've been promoted. So John 5, therefore Jesus lifting up his eyes and seeing that a large crowd was coming to him, said to Philip, where are we to buy bread so that these may eat? Now he turns to Philip probably in part because Philip is from the area. He's centrally located near this area, and he might know where to get something like this. But Philip is promoted to event planner. Where should we get something to eat for these people? No pressure, Philip. There's only 5,000 men and their families coming, and we need some food for them. So where are you going to get it? No pressure. Have you ever had a job? Have you ever been in a job where suddenly you felt like the need was great and the pressure was on? You look up and there's a crowd. Maybe you've worked retail on Black Friday. You look up at 5 o'clock in the morning and there's a crowd. You know, and the event is huge and you feel way in over your head. Have you ever been in that situation? I know that there's lots of examples I could probably pull from in my life, but maybe the biggest one was the day that our kids were born. On that day, a doctor turns to you and says, congratulations, you're a parent. This baby needs food, water, and needs to go to the bathroom a lot. Babies are a lot like crowds, right? Babies are a lot like crowds. The need is great. It is constantly pressing on us. Perhaps you've been in a place of great need this morning in your own life or in someone you know, and maybe you begin to realize that not only the need is great, but the task is impossible. That's how Philip surely felt. What do you mean? What do you mean we got to feed all these people? John 6 through 9. This he was saying to test him. This Jesus was saying to test him, for he himself knew what he was intending to do. And Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them, for everyone to receive a little. And one of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, there is a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what are these for so many people? The task was impossible. Philip starts doing the mental math as he looks around the crowd, and the mental math is not good. The numbers do not add up. So just for illustration purposes, these numbers would be probably skewed to some extent, but I want you to think about how much money we're actually talking about because they don't translate the amounts here, in part because even if you translated it today, 50 years from now, it would be a different number, so it's hard to do. So they give us what the numbers, the translators give us the numbers, 200 denarii. So a denarii is a day's worth of wages, a day's worth of wages, all right? So I figured, maybe I'll be, slightly on the cheaper side, but on the cheaper side, even if you make a little more than minimum wage, say you make $10 an hour, and you work 8 hours a day, all right? $10 an hour, 8 hours a day, that's $80. Your daily wage, $80. All right, we can work with that number. So Philip says, even if you had 200 daily wages, you would not have enough money to feed everybody by a bite of bread. 200 worth daily of denarii is $16,000. $16,000. Is that right? I keep doing this. $1,600. Yes. Man, I did this math like multiple times. See, I'm bad at math too. That's all right. $1,600. That's a lot of money. And I'm bad at math. It's like there would hardly be anything to be able to give anybody. $1,600 worth of food. That's a lot of money. A lot of food needs to be passed around. Like college students who get a bite of ramen. That's how much money we have. So how much money do you think, so $1,600, that's quite a bit of money that you would need. How much money do you think Jesus was walking around with? Probably nothing, or very little. Probably nothing or very little. So even if he says $1,600 worth of bread, that's impossible to reach. Impossible. No, I was right, $16,000. I'm right, $16,000. See, that's how bad at math I am. I'm doubting myself up here. I've done the math. I can't even do it. 200, add a 0, you have 2,000. Times that by 8, you have 16,000. I'll do the math in front of you so we can all figure it out. $16,000. If you had $16,000 and you were walking around and you needed $16,000 to feed all the people who are around you, that's a lot of money. That's like $1 a person. And that's only to get a bite. Which is that's maybe about, that's maybe a little bit inflated, but you could see how $1 a person does not go very far. How much money, so they don't have any money walking around. They wouldn't have anything. So Philip is saying, Jesus, that's a lot of people, and even if we had $16,000 worth of bread, we would only get everybody a bite to eat. Literally a bite, like you could have this nibble of this corner of bread. That's how much we have for everybody. All these people are going to be hungry. All of these people are going to need food. And then they're not just going to be hungry, they're going to become angry because you haven't given them enough food, and that's when we get people who are hangry, right? I don't want to be around people who are hangry, Jesus. That's not very fun. So his recon scout, Philip is, he's there, but he's got a recon scout, Andrew, who has gone out, and he has searched for what do we have? What are our resources? And the recon scout comes back with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. He's not good at math either. I've got 5 loaves. This little boy had 5 loaves of bread, so they're probably small loaves. They're probably not even loaves this big. I've got 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. What is this against so many? If I was Philip at this point in time, I would quit. I'm not your event planner, Jesus. Thank you very much. That's too much for me. I'm done. The need was great. The task was impossible. 5 loaves, 2 fish, 15,000-ish people. So my question this morning is, was Jesus bad at math? I know I am. I couldn't even do the numbers earlier, even though I convinced myself I did. Was Jesus bad at math? Jesus turns to Philip and says, what are you going to do about this? And in verse 6, we find out he was doing this to test him because he knew what he was intending to do. Jesus knew what was going to happen. Jesus has the end result in mind, but Philip doesn't. Hardly seems fair that Philip doesn't know what the end result would be, but Jesus would ask him anyways. So I have to ask myself, why would Jesus ask Philip what we do with all these people if Jesus already knew? And here's the answer I came up with. Philip has to know that the task is impossible. It is impossible from a natural perspective. He has to know this. He has to know this because there has to be no other explanation for what is about to happen. So Jesus is making it very clear, your task, Philip, is impossible. I'd like to think that we're beyond this, but the truth is our neutral perspective on life, our neutral perspective is a natural perspective. When we're given our resources, when we are given the opportunity to look and perceive life, our normal response is to view the world naturally, just like Philip does. He looks at it and says, 5 loaves and 2 fish doesn't go very far, Jesus. Andrew says the same thing. What is this amongst so many? But he at least found something. Our neutral perspective is a natural perspective. We only see things as they're dealt with by natural means. We fail to account for God's supernatural intervention. A different perspective is required. How does God view this event? How can I change my view of this event? And like Philip, God may be forcing us sometimes to see how impossible the task is. Because when we see how impossible the task is, we realize we have to turn to Jesus. We have no other options. So one example from my life, when we moved when we moved to Deerfield number of years ago, 2011, Susan and I moved to Deerfield. We moved from Florida to Deerfield, so that was a long stretch. That's a good amount of distance. And when we moved, I had no job. I was starting school, and Susan didn't have a job, and we had Levi, who was a little under 1 year old at the time. So when we got here, I needed a job. we needed to make money. But I had maybe one lead, and we knew that we were stepping out in faith at that point in time because we really didn't know what we were doing. And we prayed and we hoped that we would be able to find something. Can I tell you, this is incredible. Within 2 weeks, I had 2 part-time jobs. Within 2 weeks, I had 2 part-time jobs. Now, it was a difficult step when we were moving, when we didn't know what we were stepping into. We came here hoping that we would find something, but we weren't sure. And when we were in Florida, I had searched for a long time for a better job than we had and had received nothing. So I knew that jobs are sometimes difficult to come by. But within 2 weeks, 2 jobs that fit our needs, our flexibilities. One was on campus, and one I could do whenever I needed to. So we knew. I don't know that I ever thanked God enough. I do now. When I was thinking of this story, I was like, that really was God stepping in and helping us find the right places and the right things to do. The need was great, and the task was impossible. But we trusted God, and we turned to Him in that time, and we found what we needed. We didn't know the answers, but we knew the God of the universe who did. What's your crowd? The crowd that has crept up on you as you've tried to get away and have started showing up in your life. There's something to be dealt with. They need food, water, bathrooms, whatever it is. What's your crowd? And how are you thinking about the situation? Maybe you're thinking, God, I never signed up for this. And maybe God brought the crowd to you anyways, so that you would turn to Him in the midst of the impossible, to depend on Him. Philip has done what he can at this point in the story, and he knows it's not sufficient. Jesus, I don't know. We don't have any money, and we've got a little bit of bread and a little bit of fish. That's what I can do. That's what I have to offer you. And the need was great. The task was impossible. And then and only then does Jesus take over, and He provides abundantly. The last part of this story is clear. He provides abundantly. John 6, 10 through 15. Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down in numbers about 5,000. Jesus then took the loaves, and having given thanks, He distributed to those who were seated. Likewise also the fish, as much as they wanted. When they were filled, He said to His disciples, "Gather up the leftover fragments, so that nothing will be lost." So they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves, which were left over by those who had eaten. Therefore, when the people saw the sign which He had performed, they said, "This is truly the prophet who is to come into the world." So Jesus, perceiving that they were intending to come and take Him by force, and to make him king, withdrew again to the mountain by himself alone. The provision is abundant. So Jesus is now on center stage, and he begins to take the loaves, he gives thanks, and he begins to distribute. He takes the fish, he gives thanks, and he distributes. And they distribute, and they distribute, and they distribute. And Jesus multiplies, and multiplies, and multiplies. Remember Philip's remark, even 200 denarii would not be enough to allow a bite of bread? Remember that? That's supposed to be stuck in our head, because that shows there is a great crowd there. And there's a great need there. And then what does the text say? It doesn't say that they just got a bite to eat, that everybody got a bite to eat. They don't just have $16,000 worth of bread distributed amongst them. Everyone eats until they are full. Verse 12, when they were filled. When they were filled. This is a crowd that is allowed to eat an all-you-can-eat buffet until they are filled, completely and totally. Not only do they meet the bare minimum requirement of giving everyone a bite, Jesus has provided abundantly for the people. God's provision is beyond what we can imagine. Not only are they filled, to make the point even clearer, they're actually leftovers. In verse 12 and 13, gather up the leftover fragments so that nothing will be lost. Now, if I was Philip at that point in time, I'd be like, Jesus, you just distributed like 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. There's not going to be any leftovers. I'm glad I wasn't Philip in this situation, because I would have been rebuked right there. But that's what I would have said. What? Leftovers? What are you talking about? There was nothing to distribute anyways. But gather up the leftovers. So they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves, which were left over by those who had eaten. You see, the 12 baskets of fragments are to demonstrate God's overflowing abundance. It probably relates to the 12 tribes of Israel and to the 12 apostles, but it's a number of completeness, of wholeness. But more importantly, even if you don't take those numbers that way, it shows that there is an overabundance of provision that God provides at that moment. He doesn't just meet their need. He doesn't even just fill them. He goes above and beyond. So there are 12 basketfuls of bread at the end of the day. Remember, they started with 5 loaves and 2 fish. The task was impossible. They end with 12 basketfuls of bread. God provides abundantly. The point is simply this: God sees the need, he sees the impossible, and he provides abundantly. Now, I've tried to make sure that we tie all of these stories into the main point that John is trying to make, and we do this at the end. It captures a few of these ideas. Why does Jesus distribute this bread? Why does he do this miracle? Why does he do this sign? It's so that Jesus can prove that he is the Messiah, the sent one of God. The people capture this, and they understand it rightly. We know because it says, the people say, this is the prophet, the one like Moses from Deuteronomy 18, 15 through 19. They are searching for a prophet who is going to come and who is going to do certain things. And they also seem to want to take him and make him king. That's in that last verse, verse 15. Perceiving they were intending to take him by force and make him king. So the people understood Jesus is doing something special. He intends to be understood in a certain way, but they missed it just a little bit. They don't quite get what Jesus is doing. Jesus has a different goal than to be made a king in the way that they are thinking. Jesus wants to give life, and he wants not just to feed us, but provide true, abundant provision. Now, in truth, probably the most direct way to make sure we apply this passage is in salvation. First, we must understand that our need in salvation is great. We are stuck in our sin. Look, we are a crowd who is hungry and thirsty and tired, and we have to come to Jesus. Our need is great. The task is impossible. I cannot save myself. I cannot make myself a Christian. I cannot get rid of the sin that's in my life. The task is so great, it's impossible. That's why Jesus dies on the cross, to take away our sin, and has empowered us to live life today. And then finally, the provision is abundant. The cross takes it all. Right? Our sins that we can't do anything with are taken. This is clearly Jesus' goal. In part, we see this later in the story. He gives a fine discourse after this, the Bread of Life discourse, which I would encourage you to read after this. Difficult passage in part, but in verse 35, Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. In case they missed it, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me will not hunger, and he who believes in me will never thirst. Jesus is making it clear, this is not just about bread. This is about your life. This is not just about bread, this is about salvation. This is not just about bread, this is about the kingdom. Some of you today are encountering times where the need is great. It can be in your personal life, or perhaps your spiritual life, your job, your family, your friends. But it could be a difficult time. A crowd is gathering. A crowd is gathering. And you realize, I can't do this by myself. It is impossible. It's like, Jesus, I have a loaf of bread and you want me to feed 15,000 people. It's not going to work. People are marching towards me and I'm ill-equipped. The crowds are coming and I don't know what to do. To everyone who feels that way this morning, I implore you, turn to Jesus. I may be bad at math, but Jesus is not. He understands how 5 loaves and 2 fish can feed 15,000 people. He understands that. He understands that one faith-filled person can move a mountain. I don't understand that, but he does. He understands that we are inadequate to the task. But when we turn to him, we're able to do what he asks us to do. What he does know is that he is the bread of life, and anyone who comes to him will not hunger, and whoever believes in him will not thirst. So with Jesus with you, you can become good at math as well. Let's pray. God, we thank you for this morning. We thank you for the opportunity to worship you. We thank you, Lord, that when the crowds come and we feel inadequate to the task, that you are there, Lord, and you provide abundantly. Lord, would we turn to you this week in our needs? Would we turn to you this week in our salvation? Lord, would we turn to you this week in seeking you, that you may be the bread of life in our lives as well. In Jesus' name, amen.